Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to a bit of a different video. As you guys know, me and Dane went on a long holiday a little while back, and I took so many pictures and things that I thought you guys would like to see what we got up to. So our trip started nice and early as me and Dane headed from our local train station in Leighton Buzzard and headed down to London, where our train took us to London Euston Station, one of the biggest stations in London. We then headed on the Underground to our first stop on our trip. Since we weren't going to be heading towards Scotland until later that day, we had quite a lot of time to spare, and Dane has a friend who worked at the Royal College of London. So as a result, we headed off for a bit of a guided tour around the building. They do a lot of work here, and it's where some of the scientific work for many Attenborough dinosaur documentaries takes place, including the most recent one about the large newly discovered pliosaur. The first thing we got to see was this materials testing area, where they have some huge hydraulic presses which they use to test girders and bridge designs. Something I love about this place is that the floor is bolted into this spring-loaded system under it in order to handle the weight of everything on top of it. And if the system was to ever fail, the spring loading is so powerful that it would catapult the entire room out through the roof. We then headed down into the basement levels where we got to see the hydrodynamics labs. In here, they have a number of really large tanks, all designed for experiments with water. We got to see them testing a cargo ship design to investigate buoyancy at different water depths, and hear about a recent study where they use 3D printed coral and coral reefs in order to see how they affect wave generation and coastal erosion. It was just really interesting to see all the experiments and stuff they do in here. Sometimes things you wouldn't expect, such as testing different concrete makeups to see which of them were vulnerable to plant life and algae forms. From here, the plan was to spend a few hours walking around the Natural History Museum in order to see the brand new display outside and get some new video footage of the fossil areas, but when me and Dane arrived, it was like every single school in the world had decided to descend on London, so getting into the museum was unlikely. We did, however, get to look at the new outdoor area. So this has been in construction for a while now, but it looks really good. It wraps around one side of the building and basically takes the form of this plaza area with lots of seating, which is totally open. You don't have to pay to get into it at all. It's basically a park. I got a really strong Jurassic World Evolution 2 vibe from it, with the whole thing with these freshly planted prehistoric looking tree ferns and the way the whole thing has been built. The flowing path routes really did make me think of something Evo would make. The focal point for this whole area, however, is the bronze replica of the famous Dippy, the Diplodocus skeleton that used to stand in the main hall of the museum. It looks really good, and I was able to get some good video footage of it. Apparently, thanks to new discoveries, this bronze replica is actually more accurate as a fossil representation than the actual Diplodocus replica skeleton is. They've apparently done some work on improving the replica. Apparently there's also a Hypsilophodon in these gardens somewhere, also in bronze, but I couldn't see it, or I missed it somehow. In any case, I really like this area and I can't wait to see how it looks once all the plants and everything start growing a bit more and turning this place into really a beautiful Jurassic landscape. So with the plan to walk around the Natural History Museum no longer possible due to the massive queues, me and Dane switched our plans and instead headed down a few more stops on the London Underground towards the British Museum, which I've never been to before. Now, it's quite a controversial place because it does contain a lot of other countries' histories in here, with a lot of artifacts gathered during our colonial days, but I think it's still worth visiting to see a lot of what is in here. It's a huge place, and once me and Dane eventually found our entrance, we got to have a look at some interesting exhibits looking at how other cultures handle life and death, which included the rather infamous crystal skull, before heading into the central hall of the museum. This place is mind-boggling. Basically, the museum's wings headed out from here, each one having these ornate pillared frontages, and then there's also an upstairs area as well. And then in the center you have this huge gift shop area, and then the whole thing is covered by a glass dome. It really is quite an amazing structure. Now really you need to have a whole day to look at this place. So me and Dane stuck with looking at a few specific areas. The first was the wing where they have all the Egyptian, Greek and Assyrian artifacts. The Assyrian things are actually really interesting. They're an ancient Mesopotamian civilization that grew to have a really big empire around 2600 BC to about 700 BC. The museum has a lot of artifacts from them, including these carved animals, these obelisks, and carvings that tell the story of one of their rituals, a wild lion hunt. Something I especially found interesting about the Assyrian artifacts is that their writing reminds me of Klingon writing in Star Trek. It's all really angular and spiky. Also located here was the Egyptian section, where again there was a wide range of artifacts, from large stone busts of famous Egyptian pharaohs, hieroglyphic engraved wall sections, and these carved stone sarcophagi that would have held Egyptian remains. I was actually a little surprised at how big they were, and could only imagine how heavy the lids would be on them. Also attached to these areas was the Greek section, which started with smaller Greek artifacts including golden jewellery and carvings, including this really sweet dog, a Molassian hound, which would be related to modern day mastiffs. Part of this area also displays some artifacts gathered from a mausoleum, where they have this huge pillared structure on display that formed part of it, as well as numerous huge statues including this horse that would have been positioned inside. There's also so much Greek pottery to look at, and there really was too much to take photos of, especially this large hall of marble that's been designed to resemble the Parthenon. One of the most important discoveries of all time is also located here, that being the Rosetta Stone. If you don't know what the Rosetta Stone is, basically it's a piece of carved stonework which is a royal decree that's written in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and ancient Greek, and it meant for the first time we were able to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics into something else that we were more able to read. And until it had been discovered, basically Egyptian hieroglyphics were a bit of a mystery. So this was really important for sort of translating ancient Egyptian writing. The Rosetta Stone itself was such an important object that during World War II, it was a number of objects protected underground from German bombing. After we left here, we popped upstairs to have a brief look at the Asian displays, which included this beautiful exhibit of Chinese jade and jade carvings. They were all amazingly ornate, but two of my favourites included this beautiful jade dragon, which has been carved holding onto pearls, and the other, which rather lives up to my British reputation, is this teapot that's carved so thin it's actually translucent. Also up here were some beautiful painted scrolls and a range of artifacts from both China and India. Again, it was so busy we couldn't see much of it, so I'll put up what pictures I have here. After stopping to purchase an Anubis plushie as a souvenir of our day, we headed back to London Euston to wait for our transport to Scotland. We grabbed a cheeky Nando's for food, filling up on chicken, and then we had this amazing pastry style donut for dessert. Honestly, the best donut I've ever eaten. So to get to Scotland, the obvious method is to take a plane. However, I've always wanted to try one of the country's overnight express trains, so we decided to take the overnight Caledonian train up to Scotland. This train has a really long history and still serves, leaving London Euston and providing travel up to key British cities. We picked Inverness as it's where the Caledonian terminates, so it's the furthest you can go on it. We also got the most expensive package. To start with, we had access to the posh guest lounge, where for a couple of hours before we boarded we could sit, charge our technology, enjoy some free complimentary drinks and food, and even order dinner. This place even has showers for you to use so you can freshen up before your trip. I filled up on fruit salad because I can't resist free melon. Our train eventually arrived and we were allowed to board early. Our train was designed to split into 3 sections at a specific point on the route, and each section heads to a different station in Scotland, either Aberdeen, Edinburgh or Inverness. Our section, located at the front, included our sleeping cabins that come in various forms, and something called the club car, which is like a combined restaurant lounge where we could order food and drinks. Our train left London Euston at 9 o'clock at night, and we stayed in the club car for a while having a few drinks. I ordered a whiskey, and we got some nachos for a snack before we headed for our cabin. This is the most expensive cabin on the train. It included a double bed that was surprisingly spacious, some free smelly stuff including some nice shower gel and shampoos, and access to an ensuite bathroom shower section. The bed was pretty comfy for a train bed, but I don't mind saying that I really struggled to sleep on this sleeper train. The problem is that British tracks get a lot of wear and tear, and as a result the ride can be pretty bumpy at times, which I really struggled to sleep through. We woke early again, and out of the window was Scotland. So something I should explain is that I've never been out of the UK, and really I'm not very well travelled at all, mostly because my family could never afford it. This trip to Scotland is technically the furthest I've ever travelled from home, so seeing the Scottish Highlands outside of the windows was really something for me. I have never taken so many pictures of the landscape before. When we woke, the fields were still frosty and steaming in the morning sun, but soon things brightened up and we got some great views as we sat in the club car and watched the scenery flash by. We finally arrived in Inverness that morning. Now, Inverness is located on the River Ness and is located far in the north of Scotland. Since me and Dane had plenty of time before checking into our hotel, we went for a walk around town. It's a beautiful place straddling the river that ran through the city. I have never seen a river so clear as this one. And the water for this river technically comes from the Loch Ness. So naturally every gift shop in town is full of plesiosaur plushies. Something you guys might not have ever heard before is the Scottish language, so I had to take a picture of this street sign just so you folks can see the difference between English and Scottish as a language. Have fun trying to pronounce it. There was also this vape shop that I just loved the artwork of in the windows. On the bank of the river, there was this weird oddity of 3 churches that stood right next door to each other, but each one had a slightly bigger steeple, which made me wonder if this had been some sort of old Victorian contest between the churches for who had the best, biggest tower. It was really clear they'd put all their money into the towers. Checking into our hotel, me and Dane stayed at this really posh place called the Royal Highland. Just look at this entrance with this grand staircase. I felt really underdressed. Our room was pretty nice, and I especially liked the bathroom. When it comes to the great shower versus bath debate, I vastly prefer baths, and I had so many on this holiday just because I could. We would have dinner here for the first night, which was nice, if a little underwhelming, but all over, the hotel was nice enough for our short trip. Having checked into the hotel, we made our way back out in order to go have a look at the local museum and castle. Now, unfortunately, the castle was undergoing some restoration work for the summer season, so we couldn't go and have a look, but the restoration work looks really good. Now, the local museum, this was such a find. Me and Dane weren't really expecting much from it because it seemed pretty small from the outside, but we were so wrong. Like all museums in the UK, it's free to enter, and we were not prepared for this museum to contain local history from the Devonian period all the way up to the current day spread across 2 floors. It was insane. The museum starts with this prehistoric section of Inverness history, which includes a range of local species of Devonian period fish, including armoured placoderms. Nothing as huge as the Dunkleosteus, but who knows what might be discovered in the future here. Just drawers and drawers full of unique fossil remains. There was also Jurassic period ammonites, a bone from an unknown plesiosaur, and what they believe is the vertebrae bone of a possible dinosaur, so who knows, the future might result in Inverness having its own species of local dinosaur. From here, the museum moved on towards the Neolithic periods with ancient human societies that developed in the region, including the Picts, which were a group of mysterious people that used to make large hill forts in the region. There was a lot of artifacts from these guys, but my favourite was these ancient wolf carvings. These are called Ardros wolves, and they're found on a number of Pictish artifacts, and might have been inspired by the wild wolves that used to exist in the UK at the time. There was also plenty of Bronze Age artifacts, including axe blades, razors, and the blade of a halberd. The march through history continued with Roman coins, Viking artifacts like this ornate carved sword, and then all the way through the medieval period and up to the modern day, including a big display of firearms from the 19th century. There really was a lot to take photos of in here. We also spent some time at the cafe having the best lemon cake I've ever tried, and conversing with the locals who were really friendly. We spent a lot of money at the gift shop. I got myself an Andros wolf pendant. This place was such a find and survives purely on donations, so I was happy to spend some money in here and donate to keep this local museum going. It was just a really good place. Given it was a really bright sunny day, and I have to say for our trip, the weather was great and distinctly non-Scottish for the whole thing, me and Dane took a long walk up the River Ness, over its islands, and headed up towards the local botanical gardens and mini golf. I have to say this walk was beautiful, and I couldn't help but take so many pictures and videos of the river and its surrounding environment. The islands located in the river were all connected by these suspension bridges, so the whole place was built for biking and walking around. It was all so clean as well, which is something I noticed about Inverness in general. There was barely any litter around at all, and it seems clear that local folks have a really strong sense of keeping the place clean, something I wish was a lot more common around the UK. The landscape along this river was beautiful and gave me some new ideas for Jurassic World Evolution 2 and Prehistoric Kingdom. The local botanical gardens is another free to enter place, which is small for a botanical garden, but again it was really well done. I loved the tropical greenhouse, which had these huge tree ferns inside, palms and other tropical flowers. It also had a nice large koi pond. There was also a cactus greenhouse for a range of species, including barrel cactus and much bigger varieties, again some of which are in Jurassic World Evolution 2. Like I said, it's a small local place, but it seemed really nice. Located not too far away from the botanical gardens, however, was this mini golf course. Now, I love mini golf and always take the time if I go anywhere to try the local courses, and I'm telling you no word of a lie that this course we tried in Inverness was like the Dark Souls of mini golf courses. Every single hole was tough, and it was really good value. You paid once and you could basically play the entire day, go round as many times as you liked. It had a really well stocked shack with lots of food and drink there too. Eventually, after a round or two, we eventually headed for home and for dinner at the hotel. Now, we hadn't actually intended to go to the Highlands Animal Park. However, while me and Dane were talking to folks at the Inverness Museum, they happened to mention the place as it's where some wild roaming lynx had been sent to after they had been captured from being released into the wild. So me and Dane decided to plan a trip to the place. It's located a bit out of the way of Inverness, so it required some long bus rides to get to it, but it was well worth it. The park itself is located on hills on one side of the valley opposite the Kincraig Mountains, which means you get some really simply amazing views of the local terrain. Honestly, no zoo has the sort of sights that this one does. It has two sections, a walk around zoo-like area and a safari track, which you can travel with your cars. Naturally, me and Dane stuck to the walk around area, but you don't really miss many species. You can still see plenty around the zoo sections. There was quite a range of animals too. We spent some time watching the handlers exercising the wolf pack that they have, which has the run of this forest on top of a hill, before we headed up to see if we could see the lynx and markhor goats, which seem to generally love their enclosure's steep rocky outcrops. Something I would say about every enclosure in this zoo is that they were all really big and all contained enrichment for their animals. We then came across some male polar bears who were in a very deep sleep. I didn't know until I came home, but these polar bears were in the news recently as the park was building a new section onto their enclosures in order to take part in the country's polar bear breeding program. The females and male bears are at the moment kept in separate enclosures, which is basically part of natural tendencies for polar bears. Also located in this zoo was this huge lake and island for some Japanese macaques, as well as other animals including the very rare wild Scottish cat, which the zoo is in the process of beginning some much needed conservation work for. My favourite animals were probably the two Amur tigers, who had this huge forest habitat with this little stream running through it, and they were clearly very relaxed. With the male tiger was just spent most of his time while we were watching him rolling around in his sleep. They were just beautiful animals. While I understand that in the current days zoos and other wildlife parks are somewhat a controversial sort of topic, I do think that this particular park, which provides a home for locally rescued animals that people have dumped into the wild, does some really good work. And personally, the fact that every enclosure was really large and that they had put plenty of thought into the sort of enrichment and environment for the animals, and the fact that all the animals seemed really calm and really relaxed, just tells me that I think this is one of the better animal parks that I've been to. It was definitely worth the visit. We spent a lot of money in the gift shop. We got a really cute hooded plushie to remember our trip, some really nice arty coasters, and I got myself a glass wolf decoration and a really nice silver necklace. So our time in Scotland was over, but there was one last experience for me to have, and that was my first ever flight on an aircraft. Inverness has its own small and kind of adorable airport, so me and Dane decided to fly back home. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have flown before, so I won't go into lots of detail about the process of getting into boarding. That being said, I was surprised at how tight and claustrophobic the plane felt inside. Our aircraft was an Airbus A380, and even though it looked really big on the outside, the inside felt really closed in. I was also totally not prepared for takeoff. Having taxied to the end of the runway and turned around, I assumed that the plane would, gradually gain speed before gracefully taking off. I guess I have a sort of romantic image of this graceful rise into the sky. That was really not what it's like. I was recording on my phone at the time, and I think in the background, if I turn the volume up, you can hear me exclaim in surprise when the plane goes. I felt the brakes let go and the plane roll slightly, and then the acceleration kicked in all at once, and I was really surprised how violent it felt and how quickly after we started the plane had left the ground. I was also not prepared for how much you feel during takeoff. It felt like the whole plane was on jelly and it shifted around a lot. That being said, once we were higher up and on level flight, the views were amazing. Seeing everything from thousands of feet up was really something. I've included some of the better pictures I took in this video, but I've taken so many. We were soon up to 37,000 feet for cruising, and again I was not prepared how weird this felt. Because of a really big cloud layer underneath us, I couldn't see the ground, so you get absolutely no sense that you're moving at all. The flight really wasn't very long, only a little over an hour, so we were soon coming back down over Bedfordshire and landed in Luton. Again, I was really unprepared for how landing went. For a while, I thought we were still pretty high up, and then suddenly we were landing. The landing was pretty smooth, but again, I was completely surprised at how severe the braking forces were. The moment those thrust reversers kick in was quite something. Everything inside my body was just flung everywhere. I'm really glad I decided not to eat anything before taking the flight, because I'm not sure I would have kept everything down. It also surprised me how long it took to slow down the plane as opposed to how fast we got into the air. And after all that, that was my first flight. It's a really interesting experience, and if you haven't flown before, I would suggest that you do try and find like a short flight that you can go on. Like I said, this flight for me was only an hour and 20 minutes, and it was all overland as well, which was important for me just for my own sort of nerves and anxieties. But yeah, it's a really interesting experience. I do think I'm going to need more and longer flights to sort of really adjust to the whole thing and sort of get a feel for how it is to be sort of in there for a prolonged period of time. But overall, it was a really interesting experience. So that was mine and Dane's holiday to Inverness. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing what we got up to in this video. And until next time, stay safe and goodbye.